when I look at such a dynamic image is so much more that's just like, that's what I want. Ugh! I wish this camera here had a lot more dynamic range. That's what it lacks. Guys, welcome back to another video. Today we're going to be talking about the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema camera, 6K, very interesting camera, very incredible camera. So let's get into it right now. The next thing right off the bat immediately that I like and that you'll notice when you use this camera is just the image. Simply looking at the image that you get from this in 6K RAW, it's storming. It's really, really nice, especially because of the dynamic range that you get with this. Just shooting it outside where you can clearly see the sky detail and the shadow detail, it just looks really cinematic. It's not just like, you know, some people refer to like a grade that looks really cinematic, but for me, when I look at such a dynamic image, it's so much more that's just like, that's what I want. Ugh! I wish this camera here had a lot more dynamic range. That's what it lacks. But using this camera, you will not be disappointed with the image that you get, for sure. A couple of other perks that I really like about this camera is simply the fact that it works with Canon systems because it uses LPE6 batteries. So if you're a Canon shooter, you have like hundreds of those. And then the fact that this is an EF mount camera is really handy because if you're coming from Canon like I am, I have my 24, which is on my camera right now, is what I used on this, and it worked out really, really nicely. The fact that I could drop these 6K RAW files in my 2019 MacBook Pro 16-inch and run pretty smoothly. I think once I started grading some of them, put the quality at just half, it was running pretty well. So the fact that I could honestly drop in 6K RAW files was really impressive. Another thing I really, really like about this camera is the fact that how small the camera is. This is basically it's kind of awkward shaped, to be honest. It's kind of long, but it's only a little bit bigger than like a big DSLR body. The great thing about that is that I can basically just drop this in my camera bag where I would basically have this camera and it works fine. You know, usually with a cinema camera, like a C200 or something else like that, you have to use a Pelican case. So that's another thing I really like is the small form factor that you get from Blackmagic Pocket Cinema camera. The menu systems are laid out really easily, very easy to understand. I've never used this before and I basically opened it. I love that it has a lot of, you know, tactical buttons that you can press like ISO, shutter, but I didn't even really use those a lot, especially because if you use this button here, this little shutter button, it'll give you your correct exposure immediately. It's the shutter 180 degrees button, I believe. And then this camera also does have autofocus. There's an autofocus button here depending on your lens, I believe, and it does not work great. It's nothing like, you know, Canon's dual pixel autofocus. It's not meant to be. It's basically good to just hit that button, it'll find your focus point. Sometimes it won't, it'll just hunt. So that I think wasn't the greatest, but the fact that it has that to begin with is already pretty good because most cinema cameras are just manual focus entirely. And so my last favorite thing about this is the price point because this camera is $1995. So my 5D Mark IV costs more than that. Most cinema cameras at least start at like $5,000, $7,000, $10,000. And so the price point in this is really affordable if you're wanting to get into like higher resolutions, more narrative storytelling, cinema stuff. And so definitely I'm a fan about that. Now, this camera is not all perfect. There's a couple of things, or a good amount of things that I actually don't like about it. First, let's start with the body. And so even though it is a really small design and it looks well, first of all, it looks kind of wonky, but this is a rental and I can tell from someone mounting something right here, it's already chipping. The body is like a strong carbon fiber, but it doesn't feel very high quality. Like when I pick up my DSLR, it's really heavy duty. My 5D, I feel like it can just, you know, it can withstand anything like a 1DX. And this feels like if I drop it, it might crack or something like that. And I understand, again, that's that lower price point. This is basically not a complete package. It's like an entry cinema camera is how I use it. But don't mistake that because the image you get out of this is beautiful. I think Blackmagic designed this with the intention of it being built out into like a really big, nice rig. Just, you know, the camera, the brain, the body is just more affordable than other cinema cameras, which I really, really like. But to get around certain things like that, you can start rigging this out with a cage, put it on a shoulder rig, put it on some sort of, handle system, and then you'll get a lot more protection than just shooting it like this. Which, for a camera this size, I do wish it had some sort of image stabilization, because this would be really awesome as just a really small, run and gun shoot thing like this. But if you do that, which is how I did that whole intro sequence with the wedding, I did shoot it entirely like this, and so I shot it in a high frame rate of 6K at 50 frames per second to intentionally slow it down to reduce a little bit of those shakes. The second thing I really don't like about this camera is the battery life, and you'll immediately see why. Whenever you start using this and you put a LPE6 Canon battery in here, you're gonna have like 20 to 25 minutes of battery life, which is kind of like, why? And again, I think it's just because the intention is for this to be built out running like a V-mount or something like that. And so I ran through like 3 batteries just doing a couple of tests, especially like me and my wife ran somewhere to pick something up, and I was in the passenger side just taking a couple clips, and that whole trip was maybe 15 minutes and it ate the whole battery. So keep that in mind, that you'll definitely want to figure out some sort of battery system if this is going to be used for long shoots like interviews or a full day of shooting. Definitely recommend some sort of system like that. The other really big gripe I have about this, aside from the body and the battery life, is the screen. While it is really nice, really beautiful in a really nicely lit scene, if you step outside with this, even if it's an overcast day, it is really hard to see outside. So if it's completely sunny, it just looks like the screen is pretty much black. And so I was not a big fan of that. Again, that's because you'd probably want like a higher quality monitor on here. And even having focus peaking on, I couldn't really see where my focus was because it was so dark. So I'm glad some of the shots worked out. And so I guess my last and final drawback is just the fact that this isn't a complete package, but it's also a plus because that's why the price point is so low. Now, overall, I was super impressed with this camera. Do I recommend it? Yes, but I feel like it's like a very specific type of camera for a very specific type of cinematographer. This isn't gonna be someone that's like wanting to step up, maybe their YouTube game, because you don't have autofocus, you don't have long battery life, all of those things that you kind of really benefit from something like a 5D Mark IV, an EOS R, one of the new mirrorless cameras that came out from Canon, or even a Sony system, whatever. All of those have a lot more to offer for just like filming yourself and type of stuff like that. But now if you're trying to get into like filmmaking and narrative work, commercials, that's where this is gonna come into play. But just note that even though this is a $2,000 camera, you're gonna probably wanna spend like close to another $2,000 just to fully rig it out so it's fully functional for you. So yeah, you definitely get this camera for the image that you get out of this. The fact that you can honestly get 6K RAW for a $2,000 package is kind of insane. And so I would really like to mess with this camera a lot more in the future. I think this would be something that would be really good starting point for me, especially kind of like wanting to expand in the video realm, that kind of my camera is kind of limited in that as far as RAW capabilities, different resolutions, just more color information, more dynamic range. All of those things are what really interests me about this camera. And so I think this would be something that, later down the line I might look into. So guys, that's pretty much it for this video. Hope you guys enjoyed this look into the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema Camera 6K. Leave a like if you enjoyed, comment down your thoughts on what you thought of the image, what you think about this. Love to hear your thoughts on it, and subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you guys in the next video. See ya.